Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to Pop Culture Philosophers. It's Friday. That means it's time for the Rex and Robbie show. I am Robbie. This is Rex. What is up, Rex?
What's going on, Robbie?
Not much.
Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday to you, my friend. We've made it through another week. Congratulations.
We have, and Raul in the house already. Thanks for joining us, buddy.
Yes, thanks everybody for joining us. In fact, we want to know what you think, whether you're joining us live or whether you're joining us on the replay. Comment your thoughts, and you'll be entered to win a contest. We'll announce that winner on Monday's show over at The Experience. Link in the description below. Me and Rex are always joined by our buddy John on Monday night, starting at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. We go for 2 hours with great comics and all that kind of stuff. Right, Rex?
Yep, you got it. And any topic is liable to come up. It depends.
Yes, you can see the show get derailed just by the mention of spam or maybe barbecue or even Ezra Miller or Grant Gustin. You never know, right?
The show can get derailed as soon as John opens his mouth.
That is
but
right
always
on
a
the
good
money.
time, man.
Well, one thing I think I've been doing that show with you guys. I think we're coming up on a year. I think we may already be on a year. I don't know. It's been a while.
I think we already passed a year.
Yeah, right. So in this year of getting to know Rex, I have learned that Rex is a huge science fiction fan like myself. I think one of the first questions you ever asked me was like, who were my favorite sci-fi writers and stuff like that, right? Well, obviously.
Did we do a show on that? We did do one, right?
Did we? Sci-fi writer? I don't think we did. Maybe we should.
No, I don't think so either. That's a good topic for another show there.
Exactly. In fact, some of the stuff that we're talking about today may be from some of those writers. Speaking of which, we're talking about science fiction movies tonight. We're talking about our favorite sci-fi movies. Me and Rex each have a list of 5. What do you want to do, Rex? You want to alternate like 5, 5, 4, 4?
Yeah, we'll alternate, but 5, really? Between you and I? So I got to be honest with you, full disclosure up front. I have my 5, and then I got 6 honorable mentions. There's just no way 5 was going to work.
See, you used to get on to me for having honorable mentions.
I know, but I just kept crossing things and putting things back. It's just 5's not enough, bro.
Well, I got to.
So I have my 5 and 6 honorable mentions, and you're writing down a bunch of honorable mentions right now.
Well, I wrote down 1 because that's all that's popping in my head right now. But we want to know, you out there in the chat, what are your favorite science fiction movies of all time? Now, there's some movies that could be considered blends of sci-fi with other genres, sci-fi horror, sci-fi action, but as long as it's got that base where science fiction is a major part of this story, and me and Rex know what we're talking about, it's all fair game, right? So let's get it going with the honorable mentions. What you got for honorable mentions, Rex?
All right. Do you want the honorable mentions at once or one at a time?
Go, just list them. List your honorable mentions.
All right. So my honorable mentions for different reasons, but mainly because I felt like these choices couldn't be left out because they were kind of genre defining at the time, okay, if you will. So honorable mentions, all right, and in no particular order. Predator, RoboCop, Blade Runner, the original one, Terminator, Planet of the Apes, and then a real old one that I saw, believe it or not, in a film class I took in high school. Metropolis from 1927, directed by Fritz Lang.
Yeah, that's
only
great.
Because the visuals, and that was really the precursor to quality sci-fi movies. I like to think, the look, the imagery, just for something, especially when you're talking about that period of time, 1927. My gosh, they just started incorporating color as a regular thing. So I felt like that was a very defining movie for the entire genre. So I had to. So those are my honorable mentions. For each one of them, I felt like had something we hadn't seen before. Planet of the Apes. The kind of alternate future. I think the first time we really introduced to that kind of thing. Nothing more symbolic than Charlton Heston riding up to the beach and there's a half-buried Statue of Liberty. For him to realize that he didn't actually go anywhere. He returned to Earth. I think that was a pivotal moment. Predator, obviously, RoboCop, Blade Runner, they all kind of asked, they all kind of introduced something, something unique into the entire category. I think, just a unique idea, something we hadn't thought about before. Just touching on that, and great action, great cinematography, special effects, that kind of thing. For certainly for the era.
I really, really like your honorable mentions there. You mentioned Metropolis, which is visually such a stunning film, and to realize what they did at that time, you
Yeah.
know, and, and compared to things today, right? Or we have so many more resources and things look worse. But anyway, that's all subjective. But what's that one? It's like one of the first science fiction films ever. It's the Journey to the Moon or whatever, something like that. That's like
Yes.
a silent film. That's a big deal. That's
Yes.
obviously ingrained in my mind, seeing the image of the moon with the face and the rocket lands on it and
I
all
think
that.
we watched that film in that same film class that I was talking about. I think it was like a sci-fi film class, a little elective in high school, which, you're thinking, oh man, this should be a cake, which it kind of was. I mean, you went to class and watched a bunch of movies, but
What an
whenever the
awesome
projector would come out,
class.
it'd be black and white, you'd be like, oh, here we go. And I got to tell you, though, this Metropolis specifically, I remember groaning, oh, another black and white film. Hopefully this one's a talkie, so to speak, not a silent film that she was whipping out. And I remember just stopping once that film started, going, wow, this is something else. So that really, Raul says Interstellar and Jurassic Park off the top of his head. Again, I love both those movies, but there's just so many. And then Robbie capped us at 5, and then I cheated with 6 honorable mentions on top of that. So
it's all right. I've written down a few more too. And Joe Corrales says The Man Who Fell to Earth, the David Bowie one. I love that one. Dan Waters has a graphic novel that he's doing coming out later this year for The Man Who Fell to Earth. So that's really cool. I used to have the Criterion DVD that came with the book, and I wish I never got rid of that because I wish I still had it. I got some honorable mentions then. Interstellar and Jurassic Park, right off the dome, are some really good ones, Raul, for sure.
Yes.
Ouroboros says Metropolis changed my life as a 6-year-old. Heck yeah. And some other ones that pop into my head, like these aren't necessarily would be in my top 10, some of these, but they just popped up in my head as being kind of important to me in my life. I really like Minority Report.
Yes.
I really like, that's a good. I really like Gattaca. Like it's a cloning movie with
yes, I remember
Ethan
that
Hawke.
one.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like Total Recall, the Arnold Schwarzenegger one, right? You were talking about the Terminator and Predator, made me think of Total Recall. Robinson Crusoe on Mars is one that I watched a while ago because it was on Criterion. It's like from the 60s, but it's about this dude stranded on Mars. And it's just for special effects, especially at its time, it is gorgeous and beautiful. And I really like that film. And then some Terry Gilliam honorable mentions, 12 Monkeys and Brazil. Some really solid sci-fi movies, in my opinion.
I would agree with all of your honorable mentions. I mean, there's just so much out there through the years that this was a tough one as I'm going through, and just, I would put something on the list and I see something else. I'm like, well, I got to take that one off the list and bump it for this one. And it was tough trying to narrow it down to 5 or even 11. I mean, you could go top 50 and I could probably find 50 sci-fi films that I would rank up there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're both busy people, so we don't have all day to do it, right? Otherwise, we just do the top 50 sci-fi movies of all time.
Agreed.
All right. Let's crack open the list then, because we already have announced and mentioned some really great movies. So, Rex, what comes in at your number 5?
All right. So, I didn't actually rank these in order, but I guess they're sort of kind of in order. So, one, what I would say is one of the films in the top 5, and you had in your thumbnail, is obviously 2001 Space Odyssey for a lot of different reasons. I remember going with my parents to see the film in the movie theater. I was really little. And I remember that was the beginning of where the movie theaters had introduced the surround sound. So it was really loud. And I remember the noise really freaked me out as a child. Didn't watch that movie for years. And then, went back as I was older and watched it. And, obviously it was incredibly influential from the perspective that they were talking about, I don't know, introducing new ideas to the future. Obviously, special effects for the time were phenomenal. It's interesting to go back and watch that film now and see what they got right and see what they kind of got wrong. One of the funniest things I remember is when he makes the video call, which they sort of got right, but you're still a victim of your times, right? So it's just one, a phone booth, which doesn't exist anymore, obviously, but the video technology was there. But I remember he's talking to his daughter, that one scene, right, when he's at the space station before he catches the shuttle to the moon.
Yeah.
And I remember at the end of the call, the price popped up. It was like $2 and something like that. And you know, and I'll go back from time to time through the years to watch the film. And that always, I'm just looking at that going, boy, did they get that inflation thing wrong in this movie.
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess the inflation thing's got to be hard to predict. And it's really interesting to see the stuff. So I'll go ahead and just break a little bit here and be like, this is on my list too. It's much higher. So I'll go ahead and just announce that my number one is 2001: A Space Odyssey. That way we can talk about it together here.
Yeah.
I am actually right now about to finish up a reread of the book. Like I read that book for the first time, like in high school. And it really, like some people watch 2001 and they don't really get the ending, right?
Right.
The book really lays everything out for you very, very perfectly, right? Like it's all laid out there. And then if you watch the sequel, 2010, the year we made contact, not as good of a film, obviously, but it also explains some stuff too about the Star Child, the Stargate, what actually happens to Dave, how he kind of evolves up. And it even describes in the book the like how these aliens that set up this monolith, right? That their energy, right? Like they've evolved past flesh and blood into machine bodies, and now they've evolved past that to being able to just have their consciousness be energy, right? So like there's a whole lot more in that book, which rereading it now 20 something years later is blowing my mind and making me appreciate the movie even more. Special effects look better than science fiction movies today sometimes, right? Yeah. The way that they were projecting out the path and evolution of technology is pretty wild. The visuals, the music, it's haunting. It's scary. Yeah. It's like that. Just even the howl sequence alone is one of the greatest, like, tension-filled horror vignettes in cinema. You know, I love the movie. I think it's brilliant. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, to be honest.
It definitely was visually well done. You know, it got a lot of things right, I think, in a sense. It touched on the arrogance of the human existence. It just, you know, they had a lot of things bundled into it, and obviously the visuals were fantastic. But going back and watching the movie now, today, it's kind of interesting because, as I said, you are still trapped by the time period with which the movie is made. And I'll never forget the flight attendant with the big hair thing. And, you know, that was so a reflection of the time, you know, and they were dealing with such kind of just outlandish or outworldish kind of concepts, but still trapped kind of in, you know, like the phone call and everything else.
Yeah, the mentality of the 60s, right? So
yes,
this even kind of formed its own like subgenre of design and fiction of like retro futurism or something like that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So Evil Face Bad, Enemy Mine, that was another good one that I kind of crossed off my list, unfortunately. There was just way too many, but all right.
He also mentioned Star Wars trilogy, Aliens, Ghostbusters, and the first Matrix. Ouroboros.
Star Wars, I would put in my Star Wars would have been in my top five. The original Star Wars, because that particular movie again was a defining shift in the genre of science fiction movies. You know, so to me, and it played obviously a huge part of my childhood. It was things that we saw kind of in 2001 Space Odyssey, but then completely different. A kind of a empire samurai kind of all mixed into it. So it gave, you know, it shifted. I think by that period of time, the 2001 Space Odyssey became that template. And then when Star Wars hit the scene in 1977, it completely shifted how that our outlook on it. So I think that was significant. The rest of the trilogy, I don't know. You know, I you know, Strikes Back, I Return of the Jedi, I couldn't. Again, impactful movies because they've closed up stories. You know, obviously look what it's built to this point, but I couldn't put it in my top five.
Yeah. Evil Face Bad, I totally forgot about The Thing because I always think of it more as a horror film. But you're right. The Thing is another great one. Joe says Everything Everywhere All at Once, probably my favorite sci-fi movie of this year. At least I would agree with that 100%. And if science is fiction, then is every character in movies also fiction? Does it make sense? I mean, it's fiction because it's not a real story, right? But science fiction just means it's fiction that's based in science. Like science or some kind of fake movie science or book science is like the basis of a lot of the
Well,
stuff.
I mean, look at it this way. I mean, I think that science fiction, for lack of a better term, I would probably define as what we imagine science will be. Okay, when you're lacking research or empirical data, this is what we imagine it will be, and it's amazing how much they've gotten right if you think about it. You know, I mean, your iPad really is something that we saw early on in Star Trek. You know, that type of thing. So there's a lot that they ended up getting right.
I got one more honorable mention, and that's Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I'm the guy that absolutely loves that first Star Trek movie. I think that gives me like those. It's not like 2001 level vibes, but it's like Star Trek as trying to do something like that, right? Like being a purely based on ideas and stuff. Like it's not about the conflict. It's, I don't know. I really like that first.
I think that I really enjoyed it as well, you know, and I know it was not real popular with people out there, because I think that the problem with that film was it wasn't able to drag in. We had already been primed, if you will, by Star Wars. So by the time Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out, I think that hardcore Star Trek fans like yourself or myself, I enjoyed the movie. You couldn't drag in the non-Star Trek fan, you know, to come see it, because everybody's using the Star Wars as that litmus test, you know.
And that's why that's why Wrath of Khan worked, because they did that. Yeah, that
is actually on my top 5 list, and the reason is because it didn't redefine the genre, but it managed to find and finally satisfy that huge base of Star Trek fans that were sitting there clamoring for a movie. You know, they never wanted the series to be canceled anyway. And finally, it was kind of finally getting to that. And it was a good movie, and it was done in such a way that you were able to get the non-Star Trek fan, if you will, into the theaters. And I thought that's why I put it on my top 5, in the sense that it was finally successful, if you will. It finally was able to bring Star Trek to the masses, whereas Star Trek: The Motion Picture was great for Trekkies, but not so much for the general audience.
Yeah, I totally can feel that, man, because, you know, then the movies kind of go in a different direction. That's why I knew of Star Trek growing up, was because of those movies, you know. Right. And then I remember when Next Generation was coming out and how exciting that was, and they were using that music, you know, dun 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 dun, dun and all that stuff. So that's a really cool pick. I'm actually shocked that that's on there. I'm very proud of you, Rex. That's good.
Well,
I don't
as a
have
Star Trek fan, you knew one of the films was going to make it there.
Yeah,
it was between that and A Voyage Home. Okay, you know, but I felt like Wrath of Khan was first and redefined the franchise to allow Voyage Home. But Voyage Home, I thought, in and of itself, in the Star Trek universe, was a very well done movie.
I would say Voyage Home is my favorite science fiction film having to do with whales. I would say that. I would say that. So,
Evil Face Bad, I would agree. Praise so far is my favorite this year as well. I thought that was very well done.
I still haven't seen that one yet, so
you should watch it. It really is very well done. I've been told that, and I didn't realize this existed, but the I forget which tribe they're supposed to represent, but there is a version of it where it's where they speak.
It's in Comanche or something, right?
Comanche, right? I think so. It's Comanche. I'm not sure, but yeah, they speak in native Comanche. I watched it in English, not realizing that you could do that, and then I was informed, I think, by John and some viewers that you could actually watch it as original Comanche. So I'm excited to kind of go back and watch it in Comanche as opposed to English. But in and of itself, great movie. Wasn't sure what we were going to get with that, because it's been a pretty well-used franchise, if you will, and I wasn't sure, and every time they tried to reset it, it was not good. So I was really happy about this one.
All right, having revealed the number 1 being 2001, I'll go to number 5. My number 5 for tonight would be Alien, the Ridley Scott film. Right. Absolutely love it. Definitely more. I always view it more as a horror film, but it is a science fiction film too. It's one of my favorite sci-fi horrors, right next to The Thing. I love the movie. It's got this claustrophobic kind of vibe to it. The special effects, when that dude comes, when John Hurt, it's John Hurt, right? Or is it William Hurt?
Yeah,
William
John Hurt.
John Hurt.
No, John Hurt.
Yeah, John Hurt gets the, you know, the thing jumps out of his chest and all that stuff. I mean, the first time you see that, it's so shocking and it's amazing. It gave us one of the best sci-fi action heroines ever with Ripley. I love the movie. Sigourney Weaver's great. The atmosphere of it, the design, like everything about it. I'm a huge mark for Ridley Scott. This is one of my favorite films from him.
Well, let me say that I actually made my list, but I actually included both Alien and Aliens because I felt like they're connected, okay? In the sense that Alien was groundbreaking, defining. I mean, made you really think, you know, what if there were some sort of alien race that's so hard to kill or whatever. But the reason I like Alien Aliens is because it's rare that you see that happen. As you say, I think Alien was more of a horror suspense kind of movie. And then right behind it, they come out with Aliens, and it is same concept, same storyline, but now it's become more of a action kind of suspense film as opposed to a horror film. You know, and it's rare that you're able to kind of make a hard left turn like that and change the direction of a franchise like that. But they successfully did it. And both movies were absolutely excellent, you know, and they were done in a different way. So that to me was kind of groundbreaking, obviously. And again, you know, a lot of these movies are movies that I grew up with. So, you know, they had a heavy influence on me. Yeah,
I do love Aliens. When the discussion comes up on which is better, right? And I just watched Scream 2 the other night. They're having that whole, there are no sequels that surpass the original. They're having that whole discussion, and Aliens gets brought up, and you know, the little film class has this divide in that. And that's kind of how it is, right? Some people like Alien better, some people like Aliens, but both movies are great. And they do make a great 1-2 punch because the first movie deals with, you know, what I love about those Alien films, they deal with this whole like kind of theme of like the blue collar worker and the corporation having their own motives and their own reasons for things, right? And how they don't, you know, that's kind of what the movie's about, right? And because the Yutani Corporation's got this plan to do this, right? They got this ulterior mission, which is also something from 2001. Anyway, and the second one is able to take that and spin it into something the same but different. Yes. Because it's got the action, it's bringing in other characters. Bill Paxton, of course, being a fan favorite because anything Bill Paxton is in is fantastic. So, but having more aliens, having more threats, you had to do that. And it was a good way to kind of ramp it up, distinguish itself from the first one, and stand as not just a sequel, but a great movie on its own, right?
Yeah,
so.
I totally agree. I think that it's not which one is better. It's really, I look at the two films as being connected, okay? You know, one big story. And each film did what it did in a different way, and that to me was really the genius of it all. BJ asked, "Is time travel concept also sci-fi?" I totally believe it is.
For sure, absolutely. for sure. And thinking about that, Donnie Darko might be one of my favorite science fiction movies too. I don't know why I didn't think about that one. So,
yeah. So I mean, you know, all of these films had I think that all the films that are on our list, you walked out of the movie with a wow kind of feeling, like, wow, okay, I never thought of that. It's kind of feeling, and you know, all dealt with a very interesting topic that was relevant at the time in a sense. Yeah. But Raul says Starship Troopers. I really enjoyed that movie. That to me was more of a popcorn movie, kind of tongue in cheek. I enjoyed it. Let me see. I think there was something else I saw. And answering BJ's question, is time concept, H.G. Wells was the first one started. You know, of course, it totally is, in my opinion, sci-fi.
Yeah, absolutely. Next movie I want to bring up is The Matrix. The Matrix is one of my favorite science fiction movies of all time. I used to be able to say I like all the sequels, but I don't because I don't like the newest one, but I do like 2 and 3. I love the Animatrix, but that first one is absolutely one of the most monumental milestone films in cinematic sci-fi history. To me, 1999, when that movie released, I was a senior in high school, right? So to me, it's kind of like my generation's Star Wars. Like what Star Wars was to other people, like the people, the generation ahead of me, and they have these stories about, I remember when I watched Star Wars for the first time, I watched it 7 times. That's what The Matrix was for me. This was a movie that came out of nowhere, blew my mind apart, and set me on a path that I'm still on today. The action is great. The look of it is great. The concept is absolutely amazing. It is a tweaking of Grant Morrison's Invisibles, but with a lot of other influence from like manga and anime too. It was able to meld all this stuff together. And not only was it a big film for sci-fi, it not only did it reignite careers, right? But it also changed film distinctively, at least, especially for the next 5 to 10 years, where everybody was trying to do their version of The Matrix, right?
It was on my list and then off my list again, only because there's so many choices. But I would agree with you. I think that definitely was a movie you walked out and you go, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way. You know, what if our reality really isn't reality? You know, kind of concept. What was it? I think it was Men in Black. Was it 2? Men in Black 1 or 2? Where I think it was 2, where he opens the locker at the end of the movie to Will Smith and shows, you know, like all these giant people, because they had the little locker with the little tiny people. I think it answered that question. Is the reality you live in really the reality that you think that it is? So yeah, it was, you know, and obviously cinematography was phenomenal. You know, the concept of moving the camera and, you know, slow motion, dodging the bullet type thing was absolutely tremendous.
Yeah, and that's always something that's important in a lot of these movies we're talking about, is having groundbreaking, innovative special effects to go along with it. Not just create a new idea, but to create the realization of it in a physical form on screen, right?
Right. So my last choice would be, and this is more a personal kind of choice than anything else, would be Dune from 1984. Because Dune from 1984, literally I had just read the first Dune novel, I think, when I was in high school in like 1981 or 1982. So to see it come on, you know, in a live action film was phenomenal to me. And the movie was well done. They did their best. I mean, it's a very complicated universe, a complicated book. So, you know, I really enjoyed the new Dune, but it couldn't make my list because you hadn't finished the story yet, you know. And I think the way that they did it was probably better in the sense that it was going to be impossible to get all of that into one movie. And if there was any weakness to the 1984 movie, was that it was just too difficult to get all of that crammed into a movie, and that's why the movie was so long. But you know, so the only reason New Dune has not made my list is because they haven't actually finished the story. So you've got the back half of the book that you got to get to, and then once I see that, it may be on my list. You know, next time we talk about this.
I haven't seen the original Dune in a long time, like not since the. I guess it was it a director's or an extended cut was released on DVD, like in the early 2000s or something. I haven't seen it since then, right? And I remember it. I remember liking it. I remember it not being the best, but I've never read the Dune books. And then I watched the new Dune movie, and I was blown away by the scale of it, right? Yeah, and it started making me want to go back and rewatch the original, because what they were attempting to do with so much less, it's actually pretty well done. And so I think it's something I'm definitely going to be revisiting soon, the original Dune.
You want to go back and watch, but here's the thing. And I think that ultimately was the problem with Dune, was it was going to be a very difficult movie to follow if you hadn't read the books. And they were trying to fill, you know, there was all that thinking dialogue that went on in that movie, which they didn't do in the recent movie, which is good, because it doesn't translate well on film. But it was definitely a book that you had to read, and I would suggest, if you haven't read it, Robbie, I suggest you pick it up. The reason I love the movie works. The new movie, I love that one as well, and the books is because I think what Frank Herbert did was, when he wrote these books, he was really unique, because what he did was, instead of, if you look at most sci-fi, a lot of it surrounds, no matter how you slice the pie, the technology, like Minority Report. Okay, well, you still needed the technology in order to create pre-crime, right? you look at 2001 Space Odyssey, it's still very technology based in the success of that movie. Star Wars, obviously, lightsabers, blah, 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 you know, Death Star, okay? When Frank Herbert wrote Dune, he took there was still plenty of science fiction in it, but the importance that made him different from other sci-fi writers was that he placed the importance on the people, not the technology. And that was what was unique about his writing and what was unique about Dune and the entire universe he created. At the end of the day, it wasn't warp drive, it wasn't hyperspeed, it wasn't any of that. Okay, you had people that were horribly disfigured that needed to take huge amounts of spice in order to fold space, which in and of itself was a concept that is kind of abandoned in the current day movie and was addressed in the 1984 movie. So that was a disappointment in the current film. But I also understand that you're going to lose people, and that's kind of how they did in 1984. But the whole concept that these creatures, the guild, who have been mutated by the huge consumption of spice, could fold space. So instead of, you know, I remember there was a concept that was phenomenal to me. Instead of you moving, okay, space around you moves, right? So if you're on this plane, okay, you fold space, okay, by folding it, okay, and then all of a sudden you're here, not here anymore. You haven't moved, but space around you has. And that was just different from everybody else. Everybody else dealt with light speed travel in the same way. Don't care if you call it hyperspace or you call it warp speed or you call it whatever. You still needed a technology and an engine to move, okay? And Frank Herbert just saw it from a whole different perspective. Like, well, how about everything around us moves? Wow. Never quite thought of it that way.
Yeah.
And you know, it was always the strength of the people, the Bene Gesserits, the Atreides, you know, whatever. It was the individual, the human factor. And I think that's what made it, at least for me, was just fascinating.
Yeah. I actually have the book. I bought the book last year right before the movie came out. But since I just finished The Dark Tower, I've just been knocking out these like 300-page books. And then eventually I'll get to Dune, because you don't go from 1,000-page book to another giant book, right?
I will tell you, first time I picked up Dune, it was a paperback and it was probably about yay thick, you know, at least. And I'm thinking, and I'm in high school, dude. And I'm like, you know, I don't think I've ever read a book that long. And after the first 3 chapters, it didn't even feel like I was reading. It just, you know, I couldn't wait to get to the next page. Our burrow snake wasn't spice and oil metaphor. It's been, many people have said that it is, and it could be, I think. But I think what Frank Herbert was trying to say was, it could be oil, it could be anything. It's any scarce commodity. And what will happen when you have a scarce commodity that you can only get from one place? So yes, it could be oil, but I think Frank Herbert was looking beyond that. It really didn't matter if it was oil or anything else. If it is a commodity that can only be obtained in one place and it is very scarce, how does society deal with that? You know, and I think that's what it is. BJ, we actually covered The Matrix earlier on. I don't know if you missed it, my friend. We're huge fans of The Matrix. I mean, as I said, there's just no way, Robbie. 5, I'm at 11.
I still got 2 to go, but one of them was already mentioned in your honorable mentions. That's Blade Runner. Blade Runner, great movie. We've talked about that a lot on this show, on the Monday show, because 2049 always gets brought up. I'm with Rex. I don't really like 2049, but the original to me is a classic, one of my favorite movies of all time. And the other one, and this is a good one, I think, to end with, because it's a very important film in cinema history and one of my favorite science fiction movies, the original Day the Earth Stood Still. That is still an incredibly timely message. And when the movie was done, it was like the late 50s, early 60s, right? I think it's late 50s. We're right there in the middle of this Cold War. This movie is making a stance that could be even considered at the time to be against the interests of their own government or something, right? But they were making this statement about peace and how precious life is here on this earth. We're here together. And if a threat did come, you know, we wouldn't be able to do anything because we're fighting amongst ourselves, right? But also the fact that the aliens that show up in Day the Earth Stood Still, they're not there to threaten anybody. They are the ones feeling threatened. So they come with an ultimatum and they're like, yo, you got to end this stuff or we're going to destroy you, right? Like, what an amazing tension-filled movie. There's the remake with Keanu Reeves. I do not like that movie, but the original, even for a black and white movie from the 50s, it still holds up today with the way it's shot, the way it's written, the way it's performed, the message. It's timeless. This movie is timeless to me.
I got to tell you, I think that, I think the first sci-fi movie I ever saw was 2001 Space Odyssey with my parents. But again, as I said, I probably spent most of my time like with my head buried in my mom's lap because the surround sound was too loud and was freaking me out. But I think the first one that I watched and really enjoyed was The Day the Earth Stood Still, when my mom dragged me to the movie theater because I forget who the actor was, but he'd been in a lot of movies and my mom was a huge fan of his. So it didn't matter. My mom was not a sci-fi fan, but if this dude was in it, she was watching it. So she dragged me to the movie theater to watch it. And I think that was really the first time I watched a sci-fi movie and said, wow, this is really good stuff, man. I'd like to watch more stuff like this. So, again, that was very defining for me as well.
In 1951, for some reason, I always have in my head that it's late 50s, but it's 51. That's that's almost 20 years before 2001,
Yep.
It looks cool. And of course, Robert Wise was the director who also did Star Trek: The Motion Picture and West Side Story, which is not a sci-fi film, but I would like to see a sci-fi version of West Side Story. But the music too in Day the Earth Stood Still is one of my favorite scores because it uses the theremin, and by one of the masters of the theremin. I cannot remember the cat's name right now, but it doesn't matter. But it's absolutely amazing. And were you talking about Michael Rennie playing Klaatu? Was that the one that your mom really was digging? Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. He's fantastic in the movie. And of course, I remember watching it. I watched it after I had seen Army of Darkness. And then I was like, that's where the Klaatu Verata Nikto thing comes from. I was like, that's hilarious.
In those days, you didn't have, obviously streaming or anything else or YouTube. So the local cinemas would bring back old movies, right? And, at a discount. And, that's how we'd watch it. And that's how I got dragged in. It was a movie theater, I think 2 blocks from our house or something. So my mom wanted to see it and dragged me over there. And I remember, thinking, wow, this sci-fi stuff is pretty cool.
Yeah, sci-fi stuff is pretty cool. And if you want to hear more discussion on sci-fi, we've had a lot already on Pop Culture Philosophers podcasts. We have an 80s sci-fi episode. We have a 60s sci-fi episode. We have a sci-fi television episode. So lots of discussions. You can find them in the Pop Culture Philosophers playlist. Join us tomorrow night for the horror show on Dylan's Horror Show. We're talking about Nightbreed. It's the last show before Horror Fest, which starts in a couple of weeks. There's the lineup. It's massive. It's going to be a great, grand old time. And of course, don't forget to join us Monday for the show over at The Experience. Link in the description below. And Rex will tell us a little bit about that and what's coming up tonight with the original art show, right?
Tonight from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time on the Experience, our YouTube channel, you'll see original art. Even if you are not an active collector of original art, it is a great show to watch because you get to see the origins of a lot of your favorite comics. And we'll have some other stuff as well. But tune in and Nick will be on for that show. So it's 7 p.m. tonight, Eastern time on The Experience, the original art show.
Nice. And we will see everybody on Monday. Rex, I hope you have a wonderful weekend and thank you for joining and talking a little sci-fi with me.
My pleasure as always, bud.
All right. And you out there watching, we really appreciate it. Don't forget to comment below. We'll announce the winner on Monday night.